Hi there, and welcome to day 73 of 365 Days of Art. Today I'm going to be doing some foundational work. So as I go forward and I discover different things that I like and I don't like, I've really been loving painting on the wood panels. And while I do love wood, it's more expensive and sometimes it's just not as accessible, whereas canvases are so easy to get a hold of. Because of how easy it is to find stretched canvas, and with the right coupons at your local art stores, it's so easy to find a good deal on stretched canvas. So this still makes it one of my favorite choices. You can totally stretch your own canvas and get good deals on bulk linen or cotton, whatever you want to paint on, and honestly you can get really good deals on the wood that you want to put in here. It's just whether or not you feel that the time invested in doing so is worth the extra effort. For me personally, I like being able to go to the art store, use a couple coupons. A lot of times they'll have deals on buy one, get one free, and that's when I go to the store and I stock up. Now, there are a lot of people that don't care for the canvas that you get from the local craft stores. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that usually for the cheaper canvases, the weave on the fabric that they're using is a lot bigger, so it's harder to mask that grain. But even when you go up to the next level at your local store, a lot of people still don't like the way that they gesso them. They have to do it in bulk, so it's usually just 2 layers of really thick applied gesso, and it's still kind of rough. Now you might be watching this and think, why would I go through all of these extra steps to prep a canvas that's already supposed to be prepped? And that's because this is really for your intermediate type artist. If you just want to go ahead and paint on these, you don't mind the grain, that's perfectly fine. If you want to go ahead and you have the money to buy really nice quality stretched canvas, that's really good. But for me personally, I've bought a variety of canvases and I've never been fully happy with the texture on a pre-stretched, pre-gessoed canvas. I just think it's going to be better to do it myself. But this still saves me time. I don't have to have all the tools to do the stretcher bar. So it's kind of that intermediate of budget friendly, but we're gonna take it to the next level and make it better. So if you feel like that's where you're at, then this is going to be the video for you. The first step in prepping these canvases is I'm going to take a coarse sandpaper and then a medium sandpaper. I have an 80 grit and then 120 grit that I'm going to take and try to take off some of the gesso and get them all to a very even playing field. And that's because I don't know what type of gesso they used at the factory to make them, and I want to make sure that what I'm painting over top of them is going to properly adhere to the canvas and be good quality. That being said, I'm going to get to sanding and be right back with you. All 4 canvases are sanded, and a couple of notes for you. I make mistakes so that you don't have to. Of the 2 different types of sandpaper, I actually liked the coarse grit more. I thought it was going to be too much. This is 80 grit. I like the coarse grit better, and that's just because you don't have to use as much pressure to get the same type of results that you do with the medium grit. And it's easier to be careful around your edges so that you don't sand too hard and sand right through your canvas down to your board or create a hole in the middle of your canvas, which I accidentally did using the medium sandpaper on that other one, because the medium grit, and again I was using 120, what happens with this is you have to use a little more elbow grease to get the same type of finish to get it to come off. And because you're pushing harder, it's a lot easier to destroy those edges and wear them out. So I personally recommend the 80 grit. I like it a lot better. It actually feels a little bit smoother than the medium grit, which is odd, but that works for some weird reason. So all of these are ready to go for the next step. I just went online and tried to look up different ways to prepare canvas for a smooth result as possible. I'm going to get a couple of materials together and I'll be right back. On this first canvas, I'm using the most simple, straightforward approach that I could find, which is to use straight gesso, not diluted with water at all. Use it as thick as it comes from the bottle. I'm going to apply it with a brush, and you should only need 2 coats of this. What they recommend is apply a nice thick coat, let it dry, and then take a damp rag and wipe your surface smooth. I'm really hoping that works. It seems the most straightforward and simple, The only downside I can see to that is it's probably going to use a lot of gesso because, again, you're not diluting it at all. You are just using it straight from the bottle, pail, whatever it comes in. It's probably going to use a lot of it, but it could turn out really good. I don't know. These middle two, I'm using the exact same technique, but two different applications to do it. So I'll be using this brush again, and it's just a 2-inch soft bristled brush, nothing super special about it. And I have a foam brush here, which a lot of people like for glazes, to seal their paintings, because it doesn't leave any brush strokes. I haven't been a huge fan of the foam brushes though, they just don't always work out the way I want them to. But for this, it could be really good. These both are going to get 4 layers. The very first layer is supposed to be really thin. I have it mixed up here. Let me try to show you here. The consistency that I have is it's just running right off of there. That's just thick cream. So that is the very first coat that I'm going to be using here on both of these, one with a brush, one with the foam brush. The second layer is just going to be a little bit thicker, third layer, even thicker, and then for the final 4th layer, even thicker. And in between each of these, what they recommend is that you're going to rotate your canvas 90 degrees each time, brushing in one direction. And the idea is that this cross applying of the grain will keep the surface smooth. In between each coat, as you let it dry, I'm actually going to sand these very lightly with a fine grit sandpaper. Again, I don't need that coarse grit like I was using before to actually take it off. I just want to smooth the surface, not actually remove any of the gesso. So I'm using a very fine 220 grit sandpaper for that. This one on the very end is not going to be very practical, but I wanted to try. So I ran across one person that mentioned they had an art teacher that showed the whole class this little canvas. I think hers was a 4x5. These are all 4x4s to give you an idea of size. And I guess it was so smooth, almost glass-like, that she had prepped it to paint egg tempura on top of it. And she let them know she had put 20 coats of gesso on it. That doesn't seem at all practical, but it sparked my curiosity. So since it's a small canvas anyway, I'm going to give it a try. This one will take the longest. It's going to be a very similar application as these two in the middle. I don't know if I'm going to use the brush or the foam brush. We'll see how these middle two start looking, and then I'll decide from there. But I am going to try to put 20 coats on this. Very similar application I'll be using on the two in the middle. I'm going to keep applying basically whatever left over from this until I've used it all up, and then when I go thicker, go to the next step on this one until we have 20 coats, I guess. I didn't worry too much about brush strokes. You can definitely see them on there right now. I mostly tried to get a nice thick application on there because if it's too thin, I imagine the rubbing it smooth process isn't gonna work. So that's gonna dry. We're moving on now to the thin cream-like consistency. For this one, make sure when you apply it that you're doing all of your strokes in the same direction, because remember, we're gonna rotate it 90 degrees. Since I painted it this way, I'm gonna go ahead and set it down that way, so I know when I come back, my brush strokes are gonna go this way. This first coat is so thin though, that I can't see any strokes. It didn't retain anything. Next one down, I will say so far that I can actually see more strokes from the foam brush than I could see from my soft bristled brush. So that's interesting. Because of that, I'm definitely going to be using just my brush on this last one where I'm going to be doing 20 coats. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let these dry. I'll be back in a little bit. We're back for the next stages. Everything's dried. This one on the end that had the thickest coat is pretty dry to the touch. It still feels cool, which we want it to. That means it hasn't fully cured. And I'm just gonna take a rag. This is a very smooth rag. You don't wanna use anything too coarse, I imagine, like a dish rag. I'm just dampening it. I'm trying not to have it soaking wet. I'm dipping it in the water And we are gonna start on the side so that I can see how this is gonna go. I haven't sanded it, I haven't done anything to it. Just trying to wipe it smooth with the rag. I'm just gonna go ahead and show you guys. I don't know if you can see it, but it's just not very smooth. It's still really lumpy. So I'm gonna let this dry a little bit more, and then I think I'm gonna go ahead and take some sandpaper to it, just really lightly, and then maybe try taking the wet rag to it again. So far, not super hopeful on that one. I don't think it's gonna work. These middle two have dried, only one coat on each of them and just very lightly sanded. I have my next mixture. I'll try to show you the consistency. It's still runny, but you see how it drips a little bit more? So hard to show consistency in videos. Essentially from the runny texture, I added about 2 dollops, maybe about 2 quarter-sized dollops of the gesso to it, and mix it really, really well. You don't want any sort of lumps. I'm using the brush on this one, sponge on this one. Once again, I've turned them 90 degrees, so I'm brushing in the opposite direction of the grain that I brushed the first time. I'm gonna go ahead and knock both of these out. I did the exact same thing to both of them. They now have their second layer on, and I will say between the two of them, while they're very similar, I can actually notice a lot more brush strokes using the foam brush than I am getting from just using a soft bristled 2-inch brush. So far I like the brush better. I'm gonna move on to the one on the end. This one has already had 5 coats while I was waiting for the other ones to dry. The really thin coats dried super quickly, so I just went ahead and applied 5 layers, turning it like I've been talking about and sanding very lightly in between each layer. So far it's really smooth. I'm gonna do 5 coats of the slightly thicker gesso on this last one as well. As soon as it's dried and sanded, I'll be back to check up with you guys for round 3. Back again, and we are almost done. So what I ended up doing with this first one is I sanded it down really good. I applied a second thick coat to it, let it dry just a little bit, and then I tried to go through with a rag and smooth it out like the person suggested. Did not work for me. It kept smudging. It just wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. It could be the type of gesso I'm using, maybe it's the type of rag, I don't know. Their technique didn't work for me. So in the end, after I let the second coat dry, I sanded it down really good again, and I'm just gonna leave it and see what we get. The thing is, you can visually see that there are issues with it. It might be a little bit hard for you guys to see. So visually, it's not as smooth as what I wanted, but when I feel it and I run my hands across it, it is really like satin smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this guy alone for right now. What I plan to do with all 4 of these is to do an acrylic pour on all of them using the same colors, the same base layer, trying to keep all of my variables similar, and then compare all of them and see which one dries with that smooth glossy coat that I'm looking for. So this guy is done. Not a fan of the technique of applying it really thickly and then just sanding it as of right now. For all I know, the acrylic pour could dry really nicely and it may become one of my favorites, but it uses a lot of gesso and I'm just not a huge fan of how it's coming out. These 2 in the middle, they are ready for their 3rd coat. So far, they're really smooth. I can still see the grain of the canvas, which is what I'm trying to eliminate when the acrylic pour dries. And I will say, between the 2 of them, the one that I've been using the brush on is coming out a lot smoother than the one that I've been using the foam brush. So far, I'm not a fan of the foam brush, but I'm gonna keep trying. And then on this one on the very end where I'm doing a ton of coats, I've put 5 more coats of this slightly thicker gesso on it, and just doing all of these layers, sanding thinly in between it, it's becoming really smooth, which concerns me because I have a feeling this one's going to end up being my favorite. And as much as I love it, because when you thin down your gesso and you do a lot of thin layers, it's actually going further and you end up using less. However, it is more time consuming, and when doing this on a larger canvas, I could see how that would be a lot of work. I'm gonna go ahead and finish up these guys. These only need 2 more coats, sanding between the 3rd and 4th coat, and again at the very end to get a smooth finish. This guy actually needs 10 more coats still, so I've been doing about 5 for every layer, so I'll have 20 total by the end, and I'm feeling like it's gonna come out really good. Just so you guys get an idea of the consistency of this final layer, I wish I could show you better. That's kind of how it's looking. You're looking for something that's in between the consistency of honey and syrup. So it's still thick enough to start to hold its own, but it shouldn't be holding any brush strokes. Again, the only one I've been having issues with the foam brush, so we'll see how they come out. When I come to you guys next time, we'll be all done and I'll let you know which was my favorite. All right, to say that I am ready to be done is an understatement. It's late, I'm still gonna edit this video and post it, but surprisingly, this is my second favorite, is the one I did with the thick layers. Again, I'm still not happy that you can see the brush strokes, but it feels really soft, and I feel like if I really wanted to eliminate the brush strokes, that I could put probably yet another layer over it and sand that down too. It's just a little finicky, but I'm much happier with this than I thought I would be. I think a 3rd coat and this would be really good. So I'm actually really looking forward to see how acrylic pours do on this. The 2 middle ones. In the end, I'm not seeing much of a difference between the one where I used a brush and then the one where I used the foam brush. They ended up being the same in the final coats and after I sanded them down. They're smooth, they do feel really good, but I can still feel some of that texture and I can still see the texture of the canvas. So I'm not entirely sure how it's gonna look after I put an acrylic pour over it. If you wanted to do this to your canvas, this is much better than what I had at the store. The ones that come from the store still are pretty rough for me, so this is a step in the right direction. But I feel like if you're going to go through the trouble of doing all of those layers and thinning it out and slowly using a thicker layer step by step, then you've got to go all the way and do it like this one, where this, I love this. This is easily my favorite, which makes me kind of sad because now I feel like I'm going to do that to all of my canvases. What I will say as far as cutting down that process, take a prep day, and if you get a lot of canvases or you have canvases that you know you're going to be working on soon, go ahead, sand them down, paint them, and just collectively let them dry and try to find your groove, find a process. I felt like this would have been a lot easier if I had other canvases that I was also painting and had each of my different steps. It is so smooth. I can't see the grain of my canvas at all, which was my ultimate goal. Yes, I want it to be smooth and flat, but also I was trying really hard to eliminate that canvas grainy texture. I just don't care for it in my paintings as much as I love canvas. So this is hands down my favorite. I'm probably gonna be doing this to a lot of my canvases, depending again on how it stands up to the acrylic pour. And the reason I like this better, even though it's more labor intensive than this one over here, is not just that I was able to eliminate the canvas grain and make it really smooth. This one is actually heavier. I feel like I have more gesso on here, and yet it's not as smooth and it's not as nice because I worked in such thin layers and took my time and sanded. I didn't have to use as much gesso as I did. And like I was saying for this one, I almost feel like I need yet another layer. And all that's doing is adding bulk and weight to my canvas that isn't necessary. I proved that it's not necessary. So in this instance, if you're gonna go for it, I feel like go for it all the way. These were very middle ground. I can still see the grain, so I'm not sure how they're gonna do once the acrylic dries on top of them and we do some pours. And this one really surprised me. It still came out good. That's it for today. We are finally going to wrap up. When I see you guys next time, not tomorrow, but on Monday, I'll be putting acrylic pours on all of these so that we can see how they dry and how they're gonna look at the end. Always a fun time to see what we get. All right, have a good one. Bye.